Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I have a first impressions to do for you on a knife that you actually haven't seen yet because I didn't unbox this knife. At least I kind of did, I guess. It was handed to me out of the box. I got this knife when I was on my trip to Utah because I met up with my buddy Everyday Minimalist, Brandon, who will be on my podcast soon. You can be on the lookout for that. He has a relationship with BladeOps, and this is a BladeOps exclusive Spyderco PM2, which has an Emerson Wave opener. These have been out actually for quite a while, and I think they either are out of them now or they were down to their last few while I was there just the other day. But Brandon works pretty closely with those guys over there, and he was really cool and had them give me this before I left the shop that day, which was super, super generous of them. So I will link both to Brandon, Everyday Minimalist, down below, but also to BladeOps because they're a really cool shop, and I've been there now. The guys were nice there, and yeah, cool dudes over there. So it was a fun little hangout too. Also, Tyler from EDC Gear Reviews met Brandon and I there, and we all just hung out and like stole all their counter space for a little while we showed each other our collections, and it was a lot of fun. They're a cool shop. So yeah, I'll link to them down below. But let's talk about this knife a little bit because it is a different PM2. I've known that these were out for a while. I remember when these launched, basically, and I was close to buying one when they did. But in general, I'm just not a big Emerson Wave opener kind of guy, if I'm being totally honest. I would assume, because it's called the Emerson Wave, that it's Ernest Emerson, Ernie, who created the Emerson Wave. And it makes sense because on Emerson knife models, you see it a ton. It's prolific. They make a few that don't have it, but most do. I think the only knife that I own currently that has one is the ZTO 620, which is an Emerson design. So part of why I'm not a huge fan of the Emerson Wave, or I guess really the only reason, is because I'm just not super used to it at the moment. There have been times, like for years, I carried a cold steel model. It was the AK-47. They made it for a little bit with like an axis lock style lock. I don't know how they did that at the time. They must have licensed it or whatever. Anyways, I carried one of those for a long time that I got at their Factory Seconds parking lot sale when I was like a teenager. That knife was awesome at the time. And it had a wave opening feature. It wasn't like this, where it was like cut into the blade itself, but it was more so, it had like a thumb disc type of thing that had like a plate on it that stuck out. And the way it works is basically, as you're pulling the knife out of your pocket, I'll loop a little clip in right here, it catches on the back corner of your pocket. So as it catches on that back corner with the little hook, it deploys as you pull it out, so that once it's out of your pocket all the way, when you've pulled it successfully out, you don't then have to deploy the knife. It's just already deployed. So it almost functions kind of like a fixed blade in that way, where it's like, it's got to be the most efficient way, technically, to deploy a knife quickly, because by the time it's out of your pocket, it's already done. You don't have to worry about hand placement or anything like that to get to the hole or the flipper or the stud or whatever the knife you're carrying has, because if it's got a wave, it's already open. So I get it functionally, and I find it interesting, but during the times where I've been used to it, I've liked it. Like when I carried that knife regularly, I loved that it did that, and I was used to it. And so I had to train myself to be ready for when I pull the knife out of my pocket for it to open, or to pull it out of my pocket in a careful way that made sure it didn't do that, so that I could then open it less aggressively, perhaps. So these days, I just don't find myself liking Emerson Waves as much because I have to be very cognizant when I'm carrying them that it's going to do that. And it's harder for me to remember when these days, every day it's a different knife in my pocket because I'm always working on reviewing multiple things, and I just like variety, and like I don't have the muscle memory down. Let me take a sip. I don't have the muscle memory down in such a way that I'm ready for it to do that every time. So I tend to stay away from them a little bit because of that, not because I find them unfunctional or that I have an issue with them or anything like that. But for those reasons, I didn't end up ordering one of these when they dropped. But it's cool that I went to their shop and I ended up leaving with one because, A, I love the PM2. As a Spyderco model, it's my favorite. At the end of the day, it's the one that I consistently have the most of. Right now I have 4. I think this makes 5 technically PM2s, because I've got the Rec, Avocado PM2, I have the Rex Scorpion PM2, I have the Maxima Factory Seconds one that I did all the mods to, and then I've got the Wharncliffe Cutlery Shop PM2 that's wearing some Cerberus scales right now. So I've got 4 PM2s, and this makes 5. This is the 3rd blade shape I have, because I have 3 in the regular blade shape. I have the Wharncliffe, and now I have this. I've owned the Tanto before as well, so I think technically that means I've owned all of the blade shapes with this one now, at least currently at the moment. So I love the PM2. I really, really dig the knife as a model, and this is a cool new version of it for me. I think at the moment these are either sold out or are almost sold out. So if you're wanting one of these, then you may need to act quickly, or it might already be too late. Sorry, I don't know. But you've had a ton of time, to be fair. These have been out for a while. And I imagine they ordered a lot of them, the fact that they had them for quite a while. But it's an interesting PM2 for a couple of reasons. A, it looks real funky. I'll give you that. This, like having the blade not come all the way up here and having this little notch in it that then leads to this hole making this big hump, like it is a funky looking blade. Functional in the sense that that Emerson Wave works like a charm. Every time I've used this knife and deliberately pulled it out in the way that I want that to deploy the knife, it has done it without fail. But yeah, it looks very different from a normal PM2, and I think the silhouette of the knife also just looks even funkier than a normal PM2 does. But funky can be fun. So the blade, other than having the wave, obviously, is also really different from a typical PM2. I'm not sure if the stock thickness is technically a little bit thicker, or whether it just feels thicker because of the way the blade is ground, because it stays thick for so much longer, but it feels chunky compared to a normal PM2 blade. And then beyond that, this is clearly not a full flat grind. This saber grind only comes like not even halfway up this section of the blade out here. Why is that struggling so bad? Man, it's not a very tall flat grind, right? Saber grind, if you will. And because the grind isn't very tall and it's flat, it gets thick quick. So you can see also the tallness of this edge with the factory edge angle they've put on. The edge itself looks so much more broad than on a typical PM2, and that's because of the thickness behind the edge. So when they've ground to that factory edge angle, it's taken off more, like a higher distance to set that edge, if that makes any sense at all. Anyway, it makes it much thicker behind the edge, which to me, one of the big strengths of the PM2 is that it's not like thin behind the edge. I think they sit just over 20 thousandths, but they're a thin slicey blade in the sense that they're a nice tall full flat grind, and they're ground with that full flat really kind of efficiently in the way that I use knives, and they're kind of a metric of like what I think is acceptable thinness behind the edge. They slice quite well for me, the PM2 and the Para 3. So having one that's a thicker behind the edge profile to me just feels a little bit counterintuitive. But that being said, this is, I think, the most tactical PM2 that there ever has been. It's a certainly thicker blade in general, which should give you more kind of stability and rigidity. And it's also, the tip feels much stabbier than a normal PM2, and it carries way more material out to the tip. So it's going to be a much stronger tip than a typical PM2, which is a lot of people's gripe with the PM2, is that the tip is so kind of dainty, although I've never had issues with breaking tips off of them. But yeah, this tip is crazy sturdy in comparison to a typical PM2 tip. And with the wave deployment method, it's going to come out of your pocket ready to rock. It's got a big thumb ramp like any PM2, which is jimped, and it's got typical PM2 ergos. This handle is the same as always, but I think this actually is legitimately like a really good tactical or fighting knife even, because of the way that it's enhanced with those features. So it's going to be less effective or less efficient at like slicing cardboard, stuff like that. I would way rather cut an apple with a regular PM2 or a Warney PM2 than with this PM2. But if I'm at the gas station late at night, I'd probably rather have this PM2 on me, right? Like that actually makes sense to me. And so I think if you're somebody who's looking for a knife for that role, this is probably not just the best PM2 for it, but one of the best like tactical Spydercos that I've experienced. I really kind of dig it in that way. So just an interesting new PM2 for me to have here. I'm going to be carrying it and using it a whole lot more, and then I'll be doing a full review ultimately, so you can be on the lookout for that. But again, I want to thank Everyday Minimalist and BladeOps for giving this to me. Super generous of them, and exciting because I'm a sucker for Spyderco and I'm a sucker for the PM2 in general, and this is one that I just hadn't experienced yet, so I'm glad that I'm getting to try it out. And yeah, I'll link to each of them down below. Check them out if you haven't already, and full review will come pretty soon. So thanks for checking it out with me, guys. I'll see you on the next one.